Hello, you're tuning in to Thursday's edition of the Daily Report. I'm Min San-hee. There's been a slight drop in the daily tally to below the 4,000 level, but authorities remain on high alert given the number of severe COVID-19 cases. With more on this after a quick check on the broader updates with our Kwon So-ah. So, what do you have for us?
Sunny, as you said, there's been a slight drop in COVID-19 infections this Thursday to 3,938 as of 12 a.m. And that includes 3,917 domestic transmissions and 21 cases from abroad. Now, it is a drop by 177 cases from yesterday, but if we compare the figure to last Thursday, it is an on-week jump by 646 cases. And despite the overall drop in infections this Thursday, the capital Seoul has hit an all-time high again with 1,760 cases tallied, and also the same goes for Incheon with 260. That's also a record high there, and triple digits in Chungcheongnam-do prevail as well. Now with that, Korea has surpassed 429,000 total infections, and here another record high in daily death tolls. Here 39 people have lost their lives in the past day, and also there's been another rise in patients that are currently in severe or critical condition. For the past 3 days, we had record highs here and now surpassing 600. Let's move over to our vaccination figures now. We've got 82.5% of the nation's population who got at least one jab of COVID-19 vaccine, and 79.3%, or close to 40.7 million people, are fully vaccinated. Now onto the international figures. There's been a rise in more than 684,700 COVID-19 infections in the span of a day. Also, more than 8,800 people have lost their lives. Let's take a look at some countries that are still seeing resurgences around the world. We've got here the U.S. And with more than 90,000 cases on an average recently, and the U.K., Russia, Germany, and the Netherlands are also countries that are seeing high digits of infections. And here we can see the total number of deaths accumulated, with Germany just recently having surpassed 100,000 deaths in total. And those are the general updates that I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, So-ah, thank you for now. Right, as So-ah just mentioned, a grim reality is setting in here in the country, with the number of daily infections and critically ill patients hitting new highs. For more, I have Choi Min-jung in the studio again. Min-jung, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Right, now given the latest developments, Min-jung, I hear authorities are looking into the possible enhancement of current countermeasures and also the expansion of some prevention guidelines. Tell us more.
Right, so in fact, South Korea's Special Committee on Pandemic Recovery held its 4th meeting earlier in the day. The committee, led by Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum, assessed the current situation and discussed ways to tackle the resurgence. The Prime Minister said that rolling back antivirus measures may be necessary, and he also highlighted the need for a more resilient healthcare system. He said this would entail a wider adoption of home treatment, especially with medical centers in the capital region nearing full capacity. Authorities are planning to strengthen their prevention guidelines as well. Over concerns over waning immunity, the government may only allow vaccine passes to be valid for around 6 months after full vaccination. There's also the likelihood of vaccine requirements being expanded to include restaurants and cafes. And as of now, the passes are not required for these locations. Another anticipated change is the issuance of vaccine passes for those younger than 18. With infections on the rise among teenagers, venues that are popular to students, such as singing rooms, may start to require them for the pass for younger people as well.
Min-jung, due to the rise in teenage infections also and the worsening COVID-19 indices, Education Minister Yoon held an emergency meeting with virus experts this Thursday. She expressed worries on the increased risks of students' infections ever since the full reopening of schools here in the nation. Now, the Education Ministry has intensified prevention guidelines, she said, at schools, and dispatched more staff, including for preemptive PCR testings at these schools. But she said there is a limit to what such measures can do. Let's take a listen.
In order to shore up the education gap that occurred due to remote learning and to ensure safety at schools and a sense of normalcy for our children, I asked students and parents to participate in our vaccination campaign, which is the most effective prevention method.
Now, one positive factor she mentioned, however, is that we recently had the second college entrance exam, or Suneung, amid the pandemic. And she said so far there have been no cluster infections reported so far from that test.
Right, well, that is good to know. Now, aside from teenagers, Minjung, the elderly who received their vaccines earlier than the rest of the population are also at risk. What options do they have to better protect themselves?
Well, the authorities have been emphasizing the need for getting booster shots. Over the past 2 weeks, breakthrough infections accounted for 80% of all cases among those aged 60 and over. The Korean Medical Association on Wednesday said booster shots are necessary as antibody levels may be eroding among seniors who got their shots many months ago.
Right. Meanwhile, Minjung, we had some very sad news late Wednesday about Korea's first fetal death from COVID-19. Could you tell us more?
That's right. A 26-week-old fetus has died after a COVID-19 infection was passed on from the mother. The pregnant woman in question contracted COVID-19 last week, and in just 4 days, she had a miscarriage. Authorities say the mother was unvaccinated and the fetus tested positive afterwards. Whether the cause of death is COVID-related and how the fetus was infected are both yet unknown. According to research conducted by the US CDC, expecting mothers with COVID-19 were nearly twice as likely to have stillborn babies compared to their healthy counterparts. Given the risks, medical experts are recommending pregnant women get vaccinated as well.
Right, I see. All right, Minjung, thank you for now. Right, let's now move beyond national borders, Soa, to Europe, where authorities are battling a frightening resurgence that has some countries locking down again. Now, let's begin then with the latest remarks by the global health body with regard to the situation over in Europe.
Sure, Sunny. So the World Health Organization says 60% of the world's COVID-19 infections as well as deaths were from Europe in the past week. The health body's Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said on Wednesday Geneva time that these numbers are applying unsustainable pressure on medical systems and personnel. In its weekly epidemiological report, the WHO saw a global rise of 6% in COVID-19 cases, while for the European region it was an increase by 11%. The organization's chief is especially concerned over what he calls a false sense of security provided by vaccines, stressing that they do save lives but not fully prevent infections. He cited data suggesting vaccines reduced transmissions by roughly 60% before the Delta variant appeared, but that protection has dropped to some 40% now. And with that, he made this appeal.
We cannot say this clearly enough. Even if you're vaccinated, continue to take precautions to prevent becoming infected yourself and to infecting someone else who could die. That means wearing a mask, maintaining distance, avoiding crowds, and meeting others outside if you can, or in a well-ventilated space inside.
So it's not only about countries with slowing vaccination rates, but also the risks that the highly transmissible Delta variant is still posing even to fully vaccinated people. And with that, the WHO also called on governments to implement comprehensive, tailored measures to prevent new waves of infections.
Right, and that is precisely so what officials in Europe are doing, right?
Right. Sunny, do you remember the Green Pass we talked about in Italy before? Now, starting next month, the country will introduce a Super Green Pass. Italy, which used to be a hotspot of the virus at the very early beginning of the pandemic, now is seeing resurgences not as bad as in some other European countries, but with more than 10,000 daily cases posted recently and around 100 deaths on a daily basis as well. Prime Minister Mario Draghi said the situation is steadily worsening. So on December 6th, this Italian Super Green Pass will take effect, only allowing vaccinated people or those who have recovered from COVID-19 to access social and sports activities such as cinemas, gyms, nightclubs, indoor restaurants, and bars. People with negative test results within 48 hours will no longer be permitted at recreational venues. Slovakia, meanwhile, followed Austria in implementing a full lockdown for 2 weeks, during which which non-essential stores will stay closed. The country is under a 90-day state of emergency as infections in the past week rose to an average of more than 10,000. Germany is planning to make vaccines mandatory in the military, with more than 1,200 active COVID-19 cases in the country's military and civilian staff as of this week. France and the Netherlands are also set to announce new measures on Thursday and Friday, respectively.
Right. Meanwhile, so what can you tell us about news out of Russia about President Vladimir Putin partaking in a nasal vaccine test, is it?
Yes, Sunny. So Putin has tested an experimental COVID-19 nasal vaccine, and this one is not even yet in clinical trial phases. So after his latest booster shot, he tested for the intranasal vaccine, which is currently in development by the Gamaleya Center, which is also the developer of the Sputnik V vaccine. So with that, President Vladimir Putin has already gotten a fourth vaccination in total because he, as I said, got the Russian-made Sputnik light booster on Sunday, and also before that 6 months after his second dose of Sputnik V. So let's just take a listen to Putin himself on his experience.
It's just a syringe, only instead of a liquid substance. He collected powder and asked me to inhale deeply on the count of 3. He sprayed on one side and then the other side, and I sat for 15 minutes, and that's it. I honestly didn't have any sensations, just nothing.
So maybe this will contribute in boosting Russia's vaccination rates. Currently, fewer than 40% of Russian citizens are said to have been completely vaccinated, and that even though the domestically developed Sputnik V vaccine was the first one to be out on the market and has been also approved much earlier before most of the rest of the world.
Right, while many Russians have yet to get their first and second doses of the vaccine, the EU is recommending booster shots. So medical experts there have stressed that getting the extra dose will reduce infections and deaths. So on Wednesday, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control said additional doses should be considered for all adults, with priority for those 40 and older. The agency's head said booster shots should be administered at least 6 months after the completed dose, and the advice is a major shift from its previous guidance in the fall, which played down the urgency of boosters.
I see. All right, Minjung, as always, thank you very much for that report. And Soa, thank you for your input.
My pleasure.
The United Nations nuclear watchdog has warned of continued activity at a North Korean nuclear reactor used for plutonium production. Our Kim Dami has the top story.
North Korea is continuing to operate its 5-megawatt reactor at the regime's Yongbyon Nuclear Complex and is constructing a new building near its experimental light water reactor. This is according to IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi on Wednesday, while pointing out the new building, once constructed, may be used to establish a nuclear reactor or for facility management. Grossi expressed deep regret over Pyongyang's continuous nuclear activities, which violate UN Security Council resolutions. Commercial satellite imagery from 30 and North on Wednesday provided further evidence that the 5-megawatt reactor is operational, showing steam emanating from the site. That indicates at least one of the generators is active. The U.S. website, which monitors the regime, also said in its latest article that water continues to be discharged from an auxiliary pipe into a channel leading to the Kyurong River. The 5-megawatt reactor, which appeared to be shut down from 2018 until recent months, can produce up to 6 kilograms of plutonium a year. The latest activity is notable as the resumption of plutonium production is likely needed to accomplish the targets for further nuclear weapons development, said at the regime's 8th Party Congress in January. South Korea's Unification Ministry said Thursday that Sahara and international organizations are in close contact to analyze the North's recent activity. Making it clear that this activity goes against the UN Security Council resolutions, the ministry underlined that the terms of the agreement made on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula by the two Koreas and the US should be met. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration has included 27 foreign entities on its trade blacklist, citing concerns over national security and foreign policy. Kim Hyo-sun explains.
Washington has blacklisted 27 foreign entities for export control over national security concerns. According to the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, the list includes 12 entities from China, as well as Pakistan, Singapore, and Japan. It also includes one entity based in Russia. In a statement Wednesday, the Bureau said the entities have been determined by the U.S. government to be acting contrary to the national security or foreign policy interests of the U.S. It explained that 8 Chinese entities were blacklisted for their participation in the military modernization of the People's Liberation Army, seeking to acquire U.S. origin items for military application. It will also restrict exports to Chinese producers of electronics that support the modernization efforts of China's military. It also explained that 3 affiliates of China's Korea Technology Limited, an entity that has been blacklisted in 2009, were included for their role in selling technology from the U.S. and other Western countries to Iran's military and space programs. They're also known to have cooperated with North Korean front companies. The Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology was added for its production of military products for a military end user. The other entities were designated for their participation in Pakistan's ballistic missile program and on safeguarded nuclear activities. While export, re-export, and in-country transfer to these entities will be banned, the entities will also be subject to license denials. The Department of Commerce says these measures will prevent the diversion of American technologies to China and Russia's militaries, highlighting that they will be effectively used to protect U.S. national security. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
In local news, the Bank of Korea has pushed up its key interest rate yet again as part of efforts to curb consumer prices and household debt. Kim Sang-min reports.
South Korea's central bank has hiked its key interest rate to 1%, up 25 basis points amid rising inflationary pressure. The hike comes only 3 months after the central bank raised its key interest rate to 0.75%. And this also marks the first time since March last year that the rate has risen back to the 1% mark. The Bank of Korea had been keeping its key interest rate below 1% to weather the economic impact of the pandemic. The central bank's monetary policy meeting on Thursday came up with the decision mainly in response to rising inflation. Consumer prices in South Korea saw their biggest jump in almost 10 years last month, up 3.2% on year. It was the first time that the consumer price index has gone above 3% since 2012 and is far higher than the government's target of 2%. Experts say that rising household debt also made the hike inevitable.
So because a lot of people seem to be trying to get loans while the interest rate is still low. So if you wanted to control the household debt, we had to raise the interest rate multiple times as quickly as possible.
The country's household debt in the third quarter of this year came to around 1.6 trillion US dollars. But the central bank has maintained its previous economic growth forecast for the country. It projected on Thursday a 4% growth rate in GDP for 2021 and 3% next year, the same as the previous forecast made in May, likely due in part to the country's robust exports. Kim Sang-min, Arirang News.
Fans of Russian art and music, or those interested in its rich cultural heritage, are in for a treat here in the country. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us why.
The Russian Seasons, a cultural project that bridges Russia with other countries, is in South Korea this year. That follows the 30th anniversary of establishing diplomatic ties last year and the designation of 2020 and 2021 as special years of cultural exchange.
Cultural exchange further promotes exchanges of human resources. We've seen that happen after Russian seasons in Italy and Germany. It's important to learn more about each other's culture, and I hope we can have more interaction after the project is over.
One of the most significant cultural events held recently was the installation of iconic Russian writer Leo Tolstoy's bust at the Literature House Seoul. Among the participants was Vladimir Tolstoy, the great-great-grandson of Leo Tolstoy and a cultural advisor to President Putin. He stressed how significant it was to have the bust in South Korea, as well as having a South Korean company support Russian literature.
Russia's most prestigious literary awards are the Tolstoy Awards. They give prizes to writers who wrote the best literary work in Russia and the best work translated into Russian. For 20 years, Samsung Electronics has been helping us continue these awards. I am glad to see the awards, and an event like this is being held in recognition of Leo Tolstoy.
Renowned conductor Valery Gergiev, who is known to sometimes use a toothpick as a baton when leading an orchestra, also visited Seoul to hold a concert on Wednesday with the Mariinsky Stradivarius Ensemble. It is the first time for the ensemble to perform in South Korea. During the press conference, the conductor underlined that such cultural interactions are a way of fermenting diplomatic ties.
Cultural exchanges transcend political issues. Successfully continuing cultural exchanges plays a great part in maintaining a favorable relationship between countries.
As Russia and South Korea start their fourth decade of diplomatic ties, cultural events are expected to play a key role in boosting that relationship. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Vietnam and Japan agreed on Wednesday to strengthen their security cooperation and boost their pandemic-hit economies. The agreement comes as Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh held talks with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida in Tokyo, where the two leaders pledged to work together for a free and open Indo-Pacific region amid rising concerns over China's territorial assertiveness.
First of all, we agreed to continue top-level talks to strengthen political trust, substantial cooperation on security, national defense, diplomacy, and to cooperate on Taiwan. I hope we can consider each other important, long-term partners, and take the relationship between our countries to another level.
Pundits say Japan's efforts to strengthen ties with Vietnam highlights its willingness to maintain influence in Southeast Asia, as next year Cambodia will assume the chairmanship of ASEAN, raising concerns for Japan that China's influence on the group will increase, given Beijing's close ties with Cambodia. In response, Kishida agreed to export more defense equipment, such as naval vessels, to Vietnam. Pham is the first foreign leader to visit Japan since Kishida took office, while also marking the Japanese leader's first in-person meeting with another head of state, other than at international conferences. The Cyberspace Administration of China on Tuesday announced fresh regulations that strictly limit what celebrities, their agencies, and even their fans can do on social media, as Beijing continues its campaign to discipline pop culture and fan clubs. The latest measures include a limit on the number of social media accounts celebrities can have, while also banning them from showing off their luxury lifestyle and restricting posts that show their work and activities. The CAC also stipulates that entertainment companies should be limited to just one account on each social media platform, while fan club accounts need to be authorized by the agency. It also banned the act of whitewashing a celebrity if he or she has violated the law or engaged in what is considered unethical behavior. Watchers here in South Korea fear the crackdown could further hamper South Korea's entertainment business in China. In September, the Chinese government cracked down on K-pop fandom, a measure they say was necessary for a healthy cyberspace environment. NASA on Tuesday launched a spacecraft that must ultimately crash to succeed in order to test the world's first planetary defense system designed to deflect an asteroid from a potential doomsday collision with Earth. The DART spacecraft, short for Double Asteroid Redirection Test, will fly under the guidance of NASA's flight directors until the final hours of its trip, before controls will be handed over to an autonomous onboard navigation system. The spacecraft will then crash into an asteroid, altering its trajectory with sheer kinetic force to nudge the space boulder just enough off course to keep Earth out of harm's way. DART's target is an asteroid moonlet the size of a football stadium in a binary asteroid system called Didymos, the Greek word for twin. 이승재, Arirang News.
Movie theatres nationwide are also adapting to a new normal that calls for safe entertainment amid the presence of COVID-19. I have Chun Song-cho standing by with details on that. Song-cho, good to see you again.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Now, I see you are at a local movie theatre, Song-cho.
That's right. I'm at a movie theater in Songpa-gu district, and I don't know about you guys, but it's been a really long time since I last came to a movie theater, and I have to say, I'm really enjoying it, and I didn't realize that I missed coming to the theater so much. So yes, South Korea took a step to gradually phase out of COVID-19 restrictions this month, and ever since then, the movie theater industry that was hit hard by the pandemic has started picking up its steam again after 22 months of operating under stringent COVID-19 social distancing measures. So as you can see, here are a number of people already. The 10 p.m. curfew has been lifted, allowing late night screenings like pre-pandemic, and also throngs of movies that have been postponing their release dates are in line to hit the big screen once again. And in fact, the number of moviegoers have jumped significantly just this month. So it clearly shows that I'm not the only person who was really sick and tired of flipping through different online streaming services. So the pandemic has brought about a number of different changes to the film industry, and one is expanded use of kiosks at movie theaters. So obviously you see all of these kiosks, right? And obviously this is to minimize contact between people as much as possible so that we can reduce the risk of infection. So they're offering services that used to be done by humans before, like ticket reservation and also vehicle registration for free parking. And if you go over here, then here are more kiosks, actually PC tablets, and these are for the snack bar. So you can also purchase tickets and print tickets here, but if you click on this button, then you can order all kinds of drinks and snacks and popcorns you want to eat or drink during the movie. And I don't know if you've noticed, but people weren't allowed to eat snacks inside movie theater during the pandemic. However, you can easily spot people purchasing freshly popped popcorns these days because they are what's called the vaccine pass theaters for fully vaccinated people. And so for more on that, let's talk to an official here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, so can you tell our viewers what these vaccine pass theaters are and what other prevention methods that Lotte Cinema is taking right now?
Of course, yeah. We've been operating vaccine pass theaters since November 3rd, so only fully vaccinated people are allowed in. In there, our customers can sit with their friends or family without having to keep a distance, and they can also enjoy our delicious snack we sell here while watching the movie. And of course, everyone in there is vaccinated, so it's a safer and more relieving environment for everyone, and people seem to enjoy it. And we've been following every guideline that our government requires or suggests. And on top of that, we've been actually putting some extra procedures that we think are relevant or necessary in our type of business. And some of the things we do include disinfecting the whole facility every 2 hours, auditorium ventilation, requiring everyone to wear a mask, keeping distance, checking for any symptoms, and so on. We're actually very dedicated. We're putting enormous amount of effort in providing a safer environment for our customers and employees. So I hope more people can acknowledge that, feel less hesitant to come out, and bring the joy of watching their favorite movie in the theaters back to their lives again.
Right. So yeah, it is definitely a relief to know that movie theaters are committed to following the protocols. Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you very much.
All right. So if you're fully vaccinated and 2 weeks have passed since your last shot, then you are eligible to watch the movie at this special movie theater, Vaccine Pass Theater. 20 to 30% of the movie theater screens have been dedicated for these special theaters. So why don't we try going in? All right. So this is the entrance. And of course, you need to get a body temperature check. Here if you put a wrist or your forehead, then it shows you what temperature you have. And then here you can scan a personal QR code to provide your personal information. So, of course, you have to keep your face masks on at all times except for drinking and eating while you're watching the movie. All right, so I thought this day was never going to come, the day that I finally get to sink into a theater seat and immerse myself in surround sound and wafts of popcorn butter oil. But of course, I'm not going to take it for granted just because I can. Let's abide by public health protocols, because that's the least we can do to take a step toward normal life. This has been Chun Sung-cho reporting live from a movie theater in Songpa-gu District, and back to Sunny in the studio.
Right, Sung-cho, thank you for that. And do grab us some popcorn on your way back to the office.
You can bet on that, Sunny.
Recent global acclaim of Korean cultural contents, including Netflix's Squid Game, has come with its fair share of criticism as well. And one such example is related to the task of translation. For more, I have Professor Jason Gervais from Sungsha University. It's good to have you here, Professor.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Meanwhile, joining the session virtually is Professor So Jae-young at the Seoul Institute of the Arts. Professor So, again, it's a pleasure to have you.
Nice to be here.
I also have Boris Dralyuk, the editor-in-chief of the Los Angeles Review of the Books. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Dralyuk.
Thank you very much. An honor to be here.
Right, then we'll start here in the studio. Professor Gervais, Parasite director Bong Joon-ho claimed that, well, he described subtitles as the 1-inch barrier that needs to be overcome to truly indulge in many amazing productions. He said that. Now, fans of Squid Game appear to have done just that. What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. They came out in a really big way. I think younger viewers in particular, they've got a real appetite for non-English language content. We're seeing that now in studies and surveys, seeing as much as like 80% of young people, so, teenagers and those in their 20s, watching subtitled content, which is much higher than some of the older demographics. And someone like Bong Joon-ho, who grew up watching movies, he knows how much content there is out there, even before the world of streaming. And he'd watch stuff through his television, through the Forces Network here, the American Forces Network here in Korea. And now young people, they're kind of spoiled for choice. There's so much content available on Netflix, and Netflix saw, some time ago, the potential for non-English language content. Netflix is an American streaming service, but to ensure further growth, it needs to make sure that it lures in those subscribers from across the world, and so non-English language content is crucial for that. And they saw Korea as a major kind of hub for content, not only in Asia but throughout much of the world. And in 2015, they kind of started financing and producing Korean language content. Bong Joon-ho's Okja, which is much of it's in English, of course, but it was a big gamble for them, and that caused a lot of controversy. And then we have Kingdom as well, and they formed collaborations between local production companies, and they've kind of laid seeds here in Korea. And I think Squid Game is reflective of this tremendous success that they've had in the Korean market.
Right. And staying with Squid Game, Professor, so Squid Game was offered in well over 30 different languages, either dubbed or subtitled. Do tell us a bit about the role of translation in Squid Game's global success.
Well, I mean, it's very obvious that this Korean content really initially meant for the Korean audiences, but it's gone way past that. As you mentioned, there's 31 languages that it was subtitled into, and then it was also dubbed. So they got actors, voice actors to come in and dub it into 13 different languages. So I think it made a huge significant role in making, something out of a country that's very small in the world, be able to distribute all over the world. And I think what's really interesting about it is that we've really started to concentrate on the quality of translation as well because of the popularity of this program. And, there's been a lot of backlash against Netflix's English subtitling. I think a few TikTok influencers were sort of bashing Netflix's, bad translation and things like that. So this has never happened before, and I think it's just the fact that this show is so popular. People are just really taking a look at every single aspect, but definitely the language, being able to translate across different countries has definitely been a factor in making this a global hit.
Right, and before we get into the criticism it faced, Mr. Drelyuk, the work of translators has been pivotal in international recognition of several Korean creative works. Now, I understand you are a renowned translator yourself. What would you say is the role of translation in cultural contents?
Well, I'll begin by stating the obvious. I don't think that any of the things that we've been talking about, Squid Game, or for that matter, award-winning novels like The Vegetarian, would be available outside Korea, even known outside Korea, were it not for translation. Really, these are household names now in the English-speaking world, and we have translators to thank for that. Now, of course, there are differences between subtitling films and television series and translating fiction and poetry, in which language is all we get. There are no moving images. That calls for great talent and skill and deep familiarity with Korean language and culture, as well as, crucially, mastery of English. But luckily, over the past decade or so, we've seen the rise of truly brilliant translators from Korean working in every field. In literature, we have Don-mi Choi, we have Deborah Smith and Anton Hoor. We even have a collective of Korean translators called Smoking Tigers who work together to bring Korean authors into English. And the success of their translations leads to more reader interest, reader demand, and publishers take notice. And suddenly publishing more Korean literature doesn't seem like a risk. It even seems like a sure bet. Also, the success of the television series, the success of Squid Games and of Parasite, the film, that creates more curiosity about Korean culture and Korean literature, which is a key into the culture.
Right. Mr. Drelyuk, have you seen Squid Game?
You know what? I've avoided it because I'm very sensitive.
Understood. All right. Professor Beshaves, meanwhile, how do you respond to criticism of translations in Squid Game that Professor So just mentioned that reportedly hindered plot understanding and character development?
Well, personally, I watched Squid Game on its kind of the first weekend that it dropped on the service, and I didn't think the subtitles were that bad. I've been watching Korean content for 2 decades, and I've seen some really bad subtitles. And yeah, they're not perfect, but I didn't think they were particularly poor. And I think we have to be careful here. I think, constructive criticism is obviously a good thing, and that's important. But what we don't want is to scare off the subtitlers. And they work very, very hard. It's a very difficult job. I've done some subtitling myself, not extensively, but I know how difficult it is. It's an art form. And Korean is a very difficult language to translate, into English.
What's challenging for you in your translation work of Korean cultural content?
It's about trying to relay what's being said on screen in a very concise way. And sometimes the literal translation is the best way, but sometimes it's not. And when there are cultural kind of connotations as well, it's very, very difficult. And while I do understand that, the Squid Game translation was not perfect and certain things I would have translated differently, but I do think it's also important that we don't kind of scare the subtitlers off, and I think it's a very difficult job to do, and also it's a series, it's not a film. It's 6 episodes. It's several episodes, and so that's a lot of work involved. And I'm not sure about their deadlines, and so yeah, it's not great, and certainly some work was needed to be done, and the subtitles were polished later on. But I do think it's also important that we do discuss the importance of subtitles. This is something that's, I think, relatively new. I think Parasite really was a game changer in that sense, because a lot of people were discussing how good the subtitles were by my friend and colleague Darcy Parquet. And so I think, it's the discussion out there is a very, very good thing, but I do wonder whether, being very overly critical on social media is the way we should go about it.
And Professor, so what are your thoughts with regard to the translations in Squid Game?
Yeah, I agree with Jason. I think the subtitles, I looked at some of it. I did find some problematic things with the way it was subtitled, but at the same time, I think the press has really taken off on some of the social media, sort of like basically their influence is really slamming on the show. And I heard that it's even sort of spread to French and Hindi subtitles for Squid Game. It wasn't really up to par, but I looked at it carefully myself, and I know there are very cultural nuances, that are really difficult to translate into another language. For example, I translated a major Korean film, and it was really hard to subtitle something very local. Like, for example, we use Kakao Talk, which is our major sort of social network, texting service, amongst others. But in other countries, it's hard to translate that. So I had to think, do I want to use WhatsApp, or is there another text service that other countries would like? So these are kind of really hard cultural, I would say, small detailed stuff in each culture that every culture has in their language that's really hard to do. And as it was pointed out today, that basically subtitling is really difficult. Even the best subtitlers have a very hard time doing it. Also, you're under a time crunch. Remember, it's not like you have all the time in the world to finish this job. You have a deadline that's coming up, and so I think Squid Game was again really analyzed because it was such a big hit. I looked at it. Yes, there's some problematic parts of it, but overall, it's not as bad as they claim.
Right. And Mr. Dralyuk, some pundits like Professor Bechaves point out that translation itself is a form of art that is often very little appreciated. Having said that, what do you believe is important in the work of translation? Word for word direct translations, or the ability to make appropriate adaptations?
It's an excellent question. And I just want, before I answer that question, to say that I completely agree about the role of subtitlers, and we should really go easy on people who devote so much time and energy to figuring out how to pack all of that cultural information into a very small space. But now I'll answer your question. The more I translate, the more I realize that simply accurate, competent translations are very useful for academic purposes, but they probably won't win the author the audience she deserves, because translation really is an art first and foremost. And when you're translating especially a poem or a short story, you're writing a poem or a short story in the target language. The translation has to stand on its own as a work of art, or it won't convince readers that the original is a work of art. So you have to understand profoundly the meaning and style of the original, all of those nuances, but then you have to use that understanding in order to make something as powerful as the original in the target language.
Right, which is really challenging. It's easier said than done, isn't it?
It takes a lot of bravery too, because of course, departing from the original in order to create something as powerful as the original takes guts.
It really does, right? Meanwhile, Professor Bechaves, Disney Plus subscribers here in Korea have been complaining about the quality of subtitles offered by the streaming services. What do you suppose is to blame for this unfortunate reality?
Well, I think it's in terms of some of their content, Toy Story 3 and The Simpsons, it's been translated very, very poorly. It almost seems like it's been done through a computer or something. I'm not sure exactly what's happened. I guess I want to think it's teething problems. So hopefully, over time, that they will be improved. Obviously, there's a lot of content suddenly being launched in Korea at the same time. The good thing about subtitles on streaming platforms is they can improve them. So it's not like a film like Parasite and it's out in theaters or it's screening at festivals and then available on Blu-ray. The subtitles there are fixed, whereas on streaming sites they can actually improve the subtitles, and I imagine that's what they're going to do because it has caused quite a backlash.
You're right, it has. Professor, so what are your prospects with regard to the role of translation in the cultural contents industry as a whole?
Well, I think everybody's pointed out today that it's becoming more of a major role in any kind of content, whether it's audio visual or actually things like novels or short stories or books. And I think there was a mention, Jason and I talked about how it's done automatically. So, there are processes in work right now where they're trying to use AI technology to improve on it. I know Google Translate, or in Korea we have Papago. Those translation sites actually are used a lot, but it's very limiting. So, I've actually tried using that to sort of fast track my translation process, and I had to give up because it was so bad. But I think AI is definitely something different from an automated system, because what it does is actually it learns the nuances of a language, and it'll actually take on the characteristics of a human. So I think what we need to do, the reason why a lot of translation has problems also is because we not only have a very small pool of translators, but the pay is very low for a translator as well. So I think that's another problem, that to get really excellent translators, it's really hard for them to make a living out of just translating. So we need to really start to invest in translation. And a lot of these companies like Netflix, because of the backlash, I heard that the translator for Bong Joon-ho actually came in to revise the translation for Squid Game. Sharon Choi, she translated for Bong Joon-ho. So I mean, they're trying to make an effort, but I think right now the shortage of translators is a major problem. The industry really has to sort of put a lot of money into sort of developing and training translators to be able to make more content. And this only applies not only to Korea, but any country that wants to go global on their content.
Of course. Mr. Dranyuk, what are your thoughts on the current capacity over in the US to translate Korean language works into English?
Well, I'm not really an expert in the audiovisual realm, so I can't speak to what I think the other panelists have said so, I think, clearly, that there needs to be more support and more recognition for the translators as well as more pay. I can speak a little bit about Korean literature, and I think it's a boom time for Korean literature in English. I mentioned a few translators earlier, but there are also presses that specialize in literature from Asia that publish quite a lot of Korean literature: Tilted Access, Hanford Star. There's Journal of Korean Literature Now, which brings a lot of new names into English. And what we get is a picture of a vibrant literary culture with writers exploring questions of social inequality, vibrant questions of queerness, maybe women's role, and just plain old existence. And in a remarkable range of styles, tones, genres, and that's very exciting. It's an exciting development, and I hope that both publishers and funding agencies continue to support it.
Right. Mr. Dranyuk, you mentioned Han Gang's The Vegetarian earlier on, the book itself, which won the Man Booker International Prize over in the UK. Have you read that book then?
Yes.
And what were your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought it was a brilliant translation stylistically, and I think that Deborah Smith has gone on not only to translate other works just as impressively, and of course I can't assess the accuracy of the translation fully, but I can definitely assess the stylistic accomplishment of it. The book would not have done as well as it did were it not for Smith's command of style.
Right, good to know. Professor Berchevez, what needs to be done then now to perhaps perfect the work of translations of audiovisual Korean productions?
Well, I think we touched on this already, but certainly I think translators need to be paid properly and ensure that they have, they're given enough time to properly translate. Because I think there's a tendency, in Korea to do things very, very quickly, and the deadlines are sometimes not fair. And I think it's great that we're talking about it. The fact that we're on this show discussing the translation, the translations of these shows and programs and books as well, I think is testament to the fact that it's being discussed openly, and I think this is a positive development. But I think if we're going to improve the conditions for translators, I think there needs to be active discussions about how we can do that. So improving the conditions, the pay, perhaps not having just one translator, but perhaps having more than one. Not saying huge numbers, but certainly I think if there's a team of translators on any given production, then perhaps certainly like a show where there are several episodes, that certainly might help things. Whereas if you just got one translator, that's a lot of responsibility.
Right. Right. And Professor, so talking about, you mentioned investments earlier on. What investments then do you propose to better align the quality of translations to perhaps the soaring global interest in Korean contents?
Well, I think, Mr. Jae-luk talked about it already. I think there needs to be more people willing to translate. We just have a shortage of manpower that, knows both languages. So I think he mentioned vegetarian, but again, like the people that translate have to have that sort of command of the language, understanding. And right now, I heard that something like to get a really good translation, you need to get 90% of it right in the other language. And then it's the 10% that makes it a great translation or just a normal translation. And that 10% is very expensive, is what I heard from a translator. So I think we need to really kind of invest more and also train people more in this area.
Right. And Mr. Jae-luk, what would you say is the next challenge that needs to be tackled by Korean content producers, that is, with regard to the task of translation?
I do think that funding is crucial. I think recognition is the first step to funding. I think the more we know about the translators, the more the recognition the translators get, the easier it is for them to ask for more money, the easier it is for them to ask for the conditions that enable their work. I also agree that education is crucial. When people are stretched very thin, they don't have the time to acquaint themselves with the text properly. They don't have the time to steep themselves in the context of the text, the scene that the text is describing. What you're going to get is that 90% translation rather than the 100% translation.
Right, I see. All right, Mr. Jae-luk, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. Professor So, thank you very much for your insights. And Professor Beshave is here in the studio. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Right, and on that note, we say goodbye. Do take care and do join us again same time tomorrow. That would be Friday. Thank you for now.